ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to get your new customers, your returning customers, total revenue expectation, all the way down to the profit expectation. So we want to be able to consider what is the full burden cost of that revenue, and how does that relate to the profit that you want as an organization or business? Is this the right number? And then that can help us to throttle up or down the efficiency expectation. So by bringing in the full P&L and having a dynamic way to interact with the revenue forecast all the way down to the P&L in real time allows us to just like play with scenarios that customers constantly are asking is, what are my choices? Like, if I spend X, what is the Y result? If I spend A, what is the B result? Like, how do I actually think about the right spot here on this curve to maximize whatever your business objective is? Is it to maximize profit? Is it to maximize revenue growth? Is there some blend of those two that you want to consider? That's our work. That's what we're after, and why these models become so effective as the core inputs that drive this kind of discussion. Is that otherwise you're just sort of guessing at these relationships in a way that is really hard to determine.
This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by All-Stars. Whether you're hiring your first international hire or you're building a full department, All-Stars can help you hire the right people without the usual headaches. They've done 450 plus specialized placements for e-commerce sellers in the last 3 years. Their team of expert recruiters makes it hassle-free, so you're not spending dozens of hours looking at resumes and doing interviews only to end up hiring the wrong person. They've created proprietary role-specific assessments for the most common e-commerce roles, which perfects the evaluation beyond interviews alone and allows you to see how candidates actually work without the guesswork. Just go to hireallstars.com or check the show notes for more information. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined yet again by Mr. Taylor Holiday, our CEO here at Common Thread Collective. Looking slick, no hat. Taylor, what's going on today, man?
Nothing. Yeah, I'm just trying to, give your head a little room to breathe every now and again.
Yeah, no, I was saying I need to do that more, but it's like there's about 2 weeks post haircut where I'm no hat. And then, eagle-eyed watchers of the YouTube channel will maybe notice that at a certain length, probably over 1.5 inches, 2 inches, the hat has to go on.
There's also like a very real experience is that like when you get your haircut and you've got some hip, cool man doing your hair, you walk out of there feeling great, and then you can just never quite recreate it the same way, Yeah, I just got to get some better tooling.
No, I find myself touching my hair all day if it's not covered. So this is what I got to do. But all right, folks. Well, today we want to talk about a little bit is continue our conversation rather about our spend forecasting models that we've been giving away for free over the last couple of weeks to select 8 and 9 figure brands. And obviously we want to do that for you too. So if you're interested after listening to this pod, go ahead and hit us up, commonthreadco.com, smash that hire us button. Let us know that you're interested. Anyhow, what we wanted to talk through today is a couple of practical use cases for this. So mere hours, or really minutes before we hit record here, Taylor tweeted out an interesting video on his X account around basically how these forecasting models help with some of the uncertainty around tariffs that's going on right now. So what we want to do is have Taylor walk through a couple of examples. There's going to be a video element to this too. So go ahead and check it out on YouTube if you're not already. And exactly walk through what these spend and aMER models can do for you in very specific use cases. So Taylor, I'll turn it over to you. What you got for us?
Yeah. So we're talking about these free spending power models, but I think since they don't exist for a lot of people, they're hard to understand how I could practically create value out of this. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples today that are ways that you can create value using this free spending power model. So one of the big challenges that many brands, so I put out this poll the other day on Twitter that asked, what percentage of you have had to raise your prices due to tariffs? And it was 50% of brands. So let's just assume then that's an indication that about 50% of brands are experiencing some change to their underlying cost of goods today. Well, that means that there's likely some change in the gross margin profile of your business. So usually pricing changes are some attempt to offset the increase in duties that you're paying because of tariffs. Now, I've also seen data that as of today, the absorption of those changes is about 14% manufacturers eating those costs on behalf of their customers. It's about 60% the brands eating the expense and 20% the customers eating the expense. So how much you're able to pass that on is going to obviously differ from industry to industry, but what is likely true is that there's some underlying change to gross margin year over year for most brands in e-commerce. That is likely true. So this begs a question. If my gross margin goes from 60% to 55% or 60 from 52%, how does that change how I would approach setting my budget, right? Because what it functionally demands is that you are taking a higher efficiency expectation on your media. And we all know that there is some relationship between efficiency and volume. So as you go to set your Q4 budget with a different cost profile, the question is, how does that change how you need to change and set your budgets? This is a really important question, and you cannot just assume that you will be able to spend the same amount of money at a higher efficiency than you did last year. So let's think about this problem. This is the kind of problem that the spending power model is intended to help you solve. And let me sort of illustrate how we can do that. So the spending power model, what it allows us to do is look at all of the historical spend and efficiency relationship over time for every month. So seasonality, we know, is obviously a really big component of how e-commerce brands are able to spend. Spending power is different in November than it is in August for most brands, is sort of the illustration. So you can see here, I've got a bunch of different dots in this graph, and I'm just going to show you. So this initial set of dots shows me the historical spend and efficiency for every month for the brand. And our model then will tune the August expectation or build a curve for the relationship between spend and efficiency in August for this brand. Okay. That's what this yellow dotted line represents. It's a curve, an algorithmic line that shows the relationship between spend and efficiency. Then we can look at all the actual for last year in August. We can look at the selected point on the curve that we have here. And then we can see different dots for different periods of time, right? So because August has actually happened here, we have the actual as well as the last year. So let's say we're going to look out into November. And you'll notice, right, that the spend power goes up. We can spend more money. You'll see the curve goes up. But the question we're asking today is, let's imagine that there's a change to the underlying cost, because what the model is taking into consideration is also contribution margin. It's considering the costs here. You can see the cost percentage applied against the model to determine how much we can spend. And we can optimize for different outcomes. We can optimize for maximum contribution margin. We can optimize for maximum lifetime contribution or max new customer revenue at break even. All of those have cost as an input. Okay. So the question becomes, if this cost changes, what happens to our spending power? Okay. So this is a brand. This is a real example that I'm giving you that shows that right now, at their current cost profile in November, if they want to maximize new customer revenue at break even, they can spend $1.918 million to generate $3.463 million in revenue at a 1.8 aMER. And that gets them down here. You'll see basically to contribution margin neutral. Okay. But obviously, if the cost changed, the point at which their contribution margin neutral will change as well. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's assume there's a 20% change in the cost. So that would be about 8 points, right? We've got a 44% cost here. So cost of delivery is about 44% in the example I'm looking at. If that goes up 20%, that's 8 points, right? So 10% would be 4.4, 20% would be 4.8. Let's call it 5 points of margin. And to make it simple, we're just going to go to 52%. Okay, so we're going to change the underlying costs. Remember this number right here, 1.91 million at the previous, and we're going to recalculate the curve based on this adjusted cost. Boom. Okay, so Richard, for the folks at home, what just happened? What did our budget go down to?
It went down to 1.6 million.
That's right, because now our new break-even point is about a 2.08 aMER, right? We've got a 52% cost of goods. So that means we can spend less. But how much less? Well, the model tells us $300,000. So we can literally model the exact expectation of the change and come up with a new goal, which is we're going to now set our budget at 1.63 million at a 2.08 aMER to generate 3.4 million in revenue. We could do the same thing looking at contribution margin, and the point on the curve will change every time. This is really important, is to help you understand what is the trade-off. And this is, when we think about the impact of cost of delivery, this is a really under-considered point. Mm-hmm. When gross margin changes, your revenue potential changes. Let me say this again. When gross margin changes, your revenue potential changes. So we went from 3.6 million in revenue to 3.4. Why? Because you can't push as far out on the curve as you can when the gross margin is greater. Mm-hmm. So in this case, the brand can now reset their own expectations. It's going to change their financial forecast. This isn't just about changing your media, right? This isn't just about changing your budget. This is going to affect the entire financial forecast of the organization. When tariffs create change to gross margin, it changes your top line revenue potential at the same goal. This is I think the underconsidered part of this is that the reason your revenue year over year won't be quite as good, you either have to choose to sacrifice efficiency or sacrifice volume. And if you want to hold this constant, that's going to be the case. So this is a very real dialogue that we're in with our customers all the time around what is happening to your underlying costs, and therefore how does that affect what the budget's going to be and where the media plan is going to go, and therefore the financial forecast to where all of marketing and finance are aligned.
Let's quickly talk, just because to make sure we kind of redefine all of our sort of phrases here. Contribution margin neutral.
Yes.
What does that mean specifically?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that means after all costs are considered, so your product costs, shipping, fulfillment, variable expenses related to payment processor fees, and ad spend, contribution margin is net revenue minus all of those costs equals neutral, zero contribution margin, meaning you're making no money on your new customers. Now, for most people, that's not going to be a desirable effect because they need those customers to produce some amount of contribution margin. So alternatively, we could optimize for a point on the curve where we're maximizing lifetime contribution margin in some window. And we're going to talk about that example in a second, or maximizing first order contribution margin. So you can see at this point on the curve, spending $470,000 at a 5-to-1 aMER, you're going to produce $1 million in contribution margin. So why would a brand ever take neutral contribution margin? Well, because we're just looking at new customers right now. A lot of brands every month are taking, especially as you get to maturity, like this brand is, you can see they're doing about $50 million of revenue a year. They're going to make a bunch of money off their existing customer base. And so therefore they want to drive as much new customer acquisition as they can to neutral. And so we talk a lot about this idea that your existing customer contribution margin should cover OpEx. And if it does, then you can be aggressive in new customer acquisition. And so there's a dynamic here where we're interplaying all these things at once to help set how aggressive we can be in new customer acquisition.
Here's a question. Have you ever hired someone internationally only to have them disappear after a month? Most e-commerce founders make the same mistake. They accidentally hire contractors juggling multiple clients instead of dedicated employees. Allstars solves this by hiring Philippine employees with full benefits, not freelancers. They've done hundreds of specialized e-com placements, and it's for that reason why 80% of new clients return within the first 60 days for a second hire. They handle all the screening with role-specific assessments, so you only see the top pre-vetted candidates who've already proven they could do the job. Roles start as low as $1,500 a month, inclusive of salary, benefits, recruitment, HR support, and more. If you're ready to stop gambling on contractors, go to hireallstars.com or check the show notes to book a discovery call. Gotcha. And then also to be clear as well, like when you go down to that spreadsheet, or rather table that you had below, what that's representing is sort of the contribution margin neutral point or whatever, is that the contribution margin on that specific tranche of spend is. That's right. On those on that new customer revenue. Yes. So it's not like total contribution margin, but no, but on like the 20K of spend, like the difference between 1.4 million and 1.42 million or whatever, that additional 20K of spend, don't know if I have my math right, that would be contribution margin neutral. And then any spend over and against that would be negative, right? You can actually see that, like, actually what's happening is that this tranche of spend down here is like wildly negative in contribution margin. So this is a good question. Is like, what we're saying is that at this point, the incremental dollars every incremental dollar is generating 20 cents. Right. So this is actually like the point at which the next dollar is actually incrementally negative is going to be this point of the max CM, right? It's going to be like right around here. You can see the incremental. So we have a column here for incremental aMER, meaning the next dollar you put in, what is it going to generate? Well, you can see how quickly you reach a point where the next incremental dollar is producing negative. So like if this is a 2.08 is break even based on 50% COGS, then literally like the max CM point should be that. So we're still looking at the 44% cost. If I go back to 52% here, like we had earlier, that max CM point is going to be the point at which the next incremental dollar is negative. Right. So you can see that that's only $400,000 of spend. And if you want to break even, you can spend all the way up down to like 1.61 million. But you all along that way from $500,000 to 1.6 million, you're trading $1 for less than $1. And this is really important. Like
this is where I think everybody wants to know is like, what's the return on the next dollar in? And that's what this model is helping us to see, is that like the second you cross this point, you now are trading dollars for negative dollars. But you're trying to maximize revenue. And that's why we always talk about this idea of lifetime contribution margin as being the best point on the curve, because it considers the total return on those dollars and the point at which over some period of time you're going to maximize your return on investment. But even at this point where it's saying $800,000 would be the right budget, you can see that last dollar in is generating a 0.83 return, where 2.0 is break even. So you're still way out beyond the marginal frontier on that individual dollar, but the total cohort return over time is maximized at that threshold. And so that's like, I think, a really important thing for people to consider, is that these dollars are going to be very negative in terms of their impact individually, but collectively that total value is going to be greatest.
Yeah. No, I think, the point being that like this goes into very fine detail about
That's right.
the kind of efficiency of your spend. You can imagine something as huge as the effect of tariffs on your margin or whatever is going to have like this ripple effect throughout your spend, which is why it's so important to have such a detailed forecast. And I think most people are going into this just saying like, well, our margins or rather our margin is shrunk, but we'll still try to maybe kind of hit the same numbers and see what happens. You know what I mean? But this is right. Like allows you to see much more clearly.
That's right. And this is where I want to talk about something else here, which is, so we're asserting then like this consideration for the LTV of customers, right? And one of the big questions that gets asked or considered or should be considered is, what is the LTV of your Black Friday, Cyber Monday cohort of customers? Okay. And so what I want to show you right now is a very common thing that we see amongst cohort curves from gifting periods. This is especially true if your brand is subject to gifting at all. So what I'm looking at right now is a revenue over time chart. Okay. So this is sort of your traditional cohort view of customers worth X in day one. How much are they worth on day 30, 60, 90, et cetera? It's called a cumulative LTV report. So it shows you over time what a customer is worth on a revenue basis. Okay. And so what I want to show you is, like, if we look at this line right here is my November cohort. And what you'll notice is that on a first order basis, it's like the highest initial AOV of almost any of the cohorts, right? Like if I start layering in the other months, and if I just look down first AOV, you'll see that it is the highest of any month. Okay. So this is often true when you do discounts and bundles and things on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, you often get like higher AOVs. You're often also trying to like sort of offset gross margin, that sort of thing. But what I want to show that happens is that if we look at the value over time, so you see the slope of this line illustrating how much incremental revenue I'm getting over time, and we compare it to a different cohort. So I just added in, for those of you watching on the video, the February cohort curve. So what do you notice, Richard, about this line versus the gifting one?
The green being the February?
Yep, green is February, blue is November. What do you notice about these?
Well, the growth over time is better for the February cohort.
That's right. The slope of this line, in other words, how much additional value does it capture, is greater. So even though its starting point is a $132 AOV versus $144, you'll notice that by day 150, so that's month 5, it's actually surpassed the cohort value of the Black Friday one, because those customers continue to increase in value at a better rate than the gifting customers. You'll see that like by month 8, if we compare month 8 to 9, you're at $200 for the February cohort, and then it jumps to $206, so a $6 increase, whereas day 240 of the other cohort, we're at $192, and it only increases to $194, so a $2 increase. So there's a widening gap over time of the value of these customers. And you can look at this in comparison to a lot of these curves. So this is March, this is April, this is May, this is June. So in most cases, not in everyone, but in most cases, the Black Friday, Cyber Monday cohort is worth slightly less over the lifetime of the business than others. Right. So again, as we go back and say, okay, well, what does that mean about our spend and aMER model? Well, what it means is not only do we have the ability to think about the adjustment to the costs, but we also can think about the LTV multiplier that we're using. And we can say, okay, let's go to a year. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually bring this down a bit. and we're going to calculate, when we think about max lifetime contribution margin, we're going to suppress the lifetime value of this cohort over time. Now we may move the AOV up. We may say like, okay, but actually we don't want to use we want to use last year's number, and we're going to use that as being 144, let's say, slightly higher. And then that's going to give us a relationship between the AOV and the lifetime value multiplier that we're using to get to this max lifetime CM number, to really think about the right spot of setting our budget.
Right.
So all of these things are like, if you really want to be effective in setting your budgets for November and December, you need to consider your gross margin changes. You need to consider the value of these cohorts uniquely over time. And this is all the work that our growth strategists are doing to help our brands build the appropriate budget and forecast and identify the right point on this curve to maximize the value for their business.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, and I think just to kind of reiterate my earlier point, like this, the idea here is to get as like detailed and clear a sense of what is going to happen, or as accurate a model as possible of what's going to happen, so you have some understanding of how to execute against it. Again, like we talked about last time we spoke, and honestly, every single time we talk about this, it's like a model is really about creating a plan of action, not about prediction. But there's an element of being able to finally or predict as closely as possible what's going to happen gives you a sense of what the plan of action is going to need to be in order to make what you need to happen. And I think like this provides like a ton of clarity around particularly like the long-term effect of Black Friday is something I think a lot of people don't have the capacity to consider.
That's right.
And that's exactly what this gives you.
And of course, we're not stopping there, right? Because we're going to go and model the existing customers. We can do that on another episode and talk about it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're going to get your new customers, your returning customers, total revenue expectation, all the way down to the profit expectation. So we want to be able to consider what is the full burden cost of that revenue, and how does that relate to the profit that you want as an organization or business? Is this the right number? And then that can help us to throttle up or down the efficiency expectation. So by bringing in the full P&L and having a dynamic way to interact with the revenue forecast all the way down to the P&L in real time allows us to just like play with scenarios that customers constantly are asking is, what are my choices? Like if I spend X, what is the Y result? If I spend A, what is the B result? Like how do I actually think about the right spot here on this curve to maximize whatever your business objective is? Is it to maximize profit? Is it to maximize revenue growth? Is there some blend of those two that you want to consider? That's our work. That's what we're after, and why these models become so effective as the core inputs that drive this kind of discussion. Is that otherwise you're just sort of guessing at these relationships in a way that is really hard to determine.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you a question that I asked Luke and Steve, our data scientist, a couple of weeks ago, which was like, when you present these models to clients, what is generally speaking the moment that people's jaws drop, or the moment that people like really get that sense of like, oh, something's different here?
I think they're often surprised to see how much they're overspending and where the actual optimal point on the curve is. That's, I think, the thing that is always like, whoa, like we're way out beyond our marginal return. The challenge with that is that oftentimes there's a year over year business expectation that if you overspent last year to drive last year's revenue, the problem is you often are stuck in this loop where you have now redlined the business so much that the next dollars in are so negative, like we saw back to like that 0.19 incremental aMER, that you just can't actually spend more and get more. And so you suddenly feel this sensation that you just keep spending, but you're generating so little back, right? But like that is what is occurring now when if you're all the way out to $1.20. When you go to push the lever, it feels like nothing happens. And that's because it's true, right? And so when you're in that place, often you have to step back, reestablish a base where you're growing the amount of returning customers a little bit slower to then reach that next tranche of spend. And that is not a thing that brands like to do. They want to go. But unless they change the underlying input somehow, new product, new offer, new something, new piece of amazing creative, like they're ramming themselves into this really negative exchange of $1 for 10 cents that causes usually a lot of bigger business conversations. Now, in some cases, the opposite is true. There's an exciting opportunity that says, hey, you're actually massively underspending the opportunity. And we see that too. That exists too.
Right. Yeah. And I think Luke brought that up in the context specifically of like lifetime value. of understanding, like when you can get a sense of what like maximizing customer LTV would look like, you realize like, oh my God, we could have been spending way more at a much tighter first order value because our LTV is so good. And we just didn't understand that was happening.
Yeah. I also think that like with the gross margin change, I don't think that marketers are proactively seeking out understanding when that impact is going to show up on the P&L and in COGS, and therefore how does that affect my budget? I don't think those conversations are happening as much as they should.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I think that that's the kind of is a good example of how like it really feels like what these forecasting models do is they clarify problems that already exist that are invisible, right? And what'll happen is like those issues will become visible at some point, but it's going to be more catastrophic than if you were to say like, actually, you can't grow X amount year over year this month, even though that feels really bad. But if you don't do that this month, that means in several or, 6, 7, 8 months down the road, you're going to be able to grow in a way that you wouldn't have been able to if you had kept the pedal to the metal in the way that you're doing right now, right? So yeah, essentially it's like surfacing problems that are kind of festering under the surface where they come up and sort of cause a problem, right?
Exactly. And so I think all of this tooling is just ways of getting a sense of what has been true, what that means I need to try to accomplish to change it, what realities we must consider. It's also what I've found is that finance doesn't like to hear from marketing about requests for more budget without clear evidence of potential impact and incremental value, or why they can't accomplish some financial goal. CEOs don't like to hear that. And so if you're a marketer in that situation, oftentimes we are a resource to help you with that discussion, to help bring validation to the potential bounds of possibility to a board, to a CEO, to somebody in finance, where there's this pressure to accomplish things based on some commitment made somewhere that you need more evidence to the bounds of limitation. Like we can be helpful with that, or vice versa. If you're a CEO that's looking to represent to your marketing team why you think there might be more on the bone, then we can help with that too. So I think data information is power. It gives you the ability to build a case for good decision making, and that clarity is what we want to help bring to any side of the organization that is looking for more understanding of what is possible.
Love it. All right, folks. Well, if you want one of these for free and you're an 8, 9-figure business, you know who to call, who to get in touch with. commonthreadco.com, hit that hire us button, let us know that you're interested in one of our free spend and aMER models. And if you qualify, we would love to build that for you. Taylor, anything else you want to hit on this?
Nope, that's it.
Awesome.
We're going to keep trying to bring examples and edge cases of this so that you can understand why it is a useful tool inside of your organization, why I can't imagine trying to run an organization without it.
Love it. All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for us for this week. Take care, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.